I always thought of myself as a quiet presence in the corner of family gatherings, the kind of woman who offered small, polite smiles and never asked for much. I wasn't always so hesitant, but life has a way of pruning your confidence, especially when your own children start to see you as an obligation rather than a comfort. It's not that I blamed them for it. I knew I had a habit of voicing concerns, maybe more often than voicing optimism, but it came from a place of experience. Age teaches you caution, teaches you that words shouldn't be wasted on shallow pleasantries when deeper waters swirl beneath. But my daughter in law had made her feelings about me crystal clear a few days ago when she rolled her eyes at a casual family lunch and snapped, "You're too negative. Why can't you say something nice for once?" My son Peter said nothing in my defense, and all I could do was give her a tight lipped smile and mutter something about how I'd try to be more positive if that's what everyone wanted. I felt her scorn like a live wire across my chest. Still, I stayed composed because I'd learned long ago that outbursts from the older generation are often treated as tragic or pathetic attempts to cling to relevance. Deep inside, though, a piece of me cracked. I drove home that afternoon with the radio off and my eyes focused on the road, thinking about how far we drifted from the days I spent cradling Peter in my arms, promising to protect him from all the cruelty and complications of the world. It wasn't just that I felt unappreciated, I felt invisible, a footnote in the story of my own child's life. Worse yet, I saw something in Peter's eyes that day, something that told me he was embarrassed by me, and that feeling was almost unbearable. So I retreated into my little life, a small house on the edge of town, a yard that needed tending, and a handful of acquaintances who greeted me politely at the grocery store. I thought perhaps I should just yield, keep quiet, except that in my family's eyes, I had become a source of negativity, an elderly naysayer who had nothing useful to contribute. Yet fate, with its twisted sense of humor, had other plans. A few days after that humiliating lunch, I discovered something that made my heart pound in a confused mixture of anger, disbelief, and a startling sense of power. I was at the local farmer's market, dithering over whether to buy fresh strawberries or the more practical sweet potatoes. I turned around and saw a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, rummaging in her purse for cash. She was stunning with that effortless glow of someone who has no idea how gorgeous she is. Her eyes flicked to mine, and she gave me a polite, if slightly rushed, smile. Something in her expression tugged at me, some intangible familiarity, but I couldn't place it. I paid for my vegetables and was about to leave when she tapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Excuse me, do you happen to have a pen?" I rummaged in my bag and handed her one, and as she scribbled down something on the back of a receipt, I noticed her hands trembling ever so slightly. We made small talk. She mentioned needing directions to the old library a few blocks away, and I explained how to get there. Then, just when I was about to turn away for good, she seemed to size me up, her eyes darting with nervous hesitation. "I'm so sorry, but could I ask you a question? You seem trustworthy." Of all the words to describe me, that wasn't one I heard from my own family anymore. I nodded, and she went on to ask me if I knew about any discreet doctor's offices in town, especially ones that specialized in certain female concerns. Her voice wavered, and she looked down at her feet. I realized she was probably in trouble. My heart pinched with sympathy, and I pointed her toward a small women's clinic not far from here, known for its confidentiality. She thanked me, and for a moment, I swore I saw tears in her eyes. Then, in a low, urgent voice, she added that her situation was complicated, that the baby's father had told her he wasn't ready to upend his life, that he was in the middle of a messy marriage but wouldn't leave until some final arrangement was settled. I felt a wave of compassion, but also a pulse of anger for this faceless man who was using this poor woman, offering her what sounded like only pieces of himself. I gave her what reassurance I could, and then we went our separate ways, though something about the entire encounter stayed with me. Later, at home, I'd all but dismissed it as a sad anecdote, one more reason I believed the world was cruel at times. Then I saw Peter's car in my driveway. My immediate reaction was a flush of anxiety, as though I were a child again wondering why I'd been called to the principal's office. I found him sitting in my living room, fiddling with the framed photo of us taken the day he'd graduated from college. He looked up, forcing a smile. Mom, didn't mean to scare you. He set the photo down. I just wanted to come by and apologize about the other day. Sarah, that was my daughter in law's name, she's just stressed with everything going on. I know she can be a bit harsh, but she's got a lot on her mind. I see, I said softly, placing the vegetables on the kitchen counter. And what about you? Are you all right? He gave a slight shrug, some tension flickering across his face, but he covered it quickly. I'm fine. Just, you know, work stuff. And Sarah wants a bigger house, but we're strapped for cash. She thinks I'm not ambitious enough. Dad was the big earner, right? He laughed nervously, referencing my late husband, who had indeed been the financial pillar of our family. I felt a pang in my chest, remembering how that pillar eventually crumbled under the weight of his own regrets and health issues. She mentioned I should pick up more overtime. Anyway, look, I'm sorry. I know you try. And I know sometimes you say things that come across as less than hopeful, but it's not that we don't appreciate you. He stood and approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. His voice dropped. We just need a break from negativity, okay? Life is stressful enough. I nodded, that same sense of shame flooding me, the sense that I was the inconvenience. Of course I wanted to promise him I'd be more cheerful, but something stopped me, maybe the flicker of pain behind his words. I understand, I managed, fighting a tremor in my voice. If I'm being difficult for you and Sarah, I'll try to give you both space. He exhaled, relieved, then offered a half-hearted smile. Thanks, Mom. I thought he was going to leave, but he lingered, glancing around at the small living room. You should get some new furniture, he said gently. These couches have seen better days. I suppressed a sigh. He was right, but it wasn't in my budget. As if reading my mind, he added, well, once things get better at work, maybe I can help you out with that. He kissed me on the cheek and left. After he was gone, I sank into one of those worn couches and stared at the photo he'd been holding. In it, we looked so happy, an unbreakable unit of mother and son. Now we were like strangers, dancing around each other's feelings. I told myself to keep trying, to prove that I could be supportive. I picked up the phone and tried calling him later that evening, thinking maybe we could have dinner, just the two of us. But he didn't pick up, and I didn't have the courage to leave a voicemail. For days, I struggled with how to navigate the next family event. Sarah's birthday was coming up, and I knew I had to show my face with a smile. Determined not to spoil the evening with any of my negativity, I went shopping for a thoughtful gift, something that might show her I wasn't the bitter mother-in-law she thought I was. I wandered from store to store, but nothing felt right. I ended up getting a luxurious scented candle and some expensive bath salts, a generic but safe choice. As I walked out of the mall, I nearly ran straight into that same young woman from the farmer's market. She was balancing a couple of shopping bags on one arm and looked paler than before. The moment our eyes met, her face lit up with recognition, mixed with an awkward kind of desperation. I felt compelled to say hello. She seemed relieved to see me, which was odd given we'd only spoken briefly once. She confided that she'd been to the clinic, that she was definitely pregnant, and that the father was continuing to make excuses. He had a big event at work, a wife who was suspicious, a mother who was somehow involved in his life in a way that made things difficult. The words poured out of her as though she had no one else to talk to. Something in me softened. I wasn't quite sure why, but I offered to take her to a small cafe just inside the mall so she could get a glass of water and calm down. We sat there for a few minutes, and I couldn't help noticing her trembling hands again. She was petrified and alone, and she kept mentioning that the father had promised to figure things out but was dragging his feet. She didn't say his name, and I didn't ask for it. I assumed I'd never seen the man. But then she described a small detail, a distinctive watch with an inscription on the back, something about time is precious. A chill snaked down my spine. I remembered that watch, or one just like it. My late husband had given it to Peter on his wedding day. I clutched the edge of my seat, forcing myself not to show the tremor that started in my hands. Surely there were many watches out there with cheesy inscriptions, but when she said the brand name, my stomach sank. It wasn't a common brand, and it had been a custom job. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I suddenly felt like the walls of the cafe were closing in on me. Peter? My Peter? Could he be the father of this baby? My breath shuddered. She went on talking, not noticing my shock, mentioning something about the father's uneasy relationship with his mother, how he claimed he was constantly battling her negativity, how he felt stuck between a wife who demanded positivity and a mother who saw only worst case scenarios. That was all I needed to hear. I must have gone pale because she stopped and asked if I was okay. I gathered my composure, forced a pained but benign smile, and claimed I felt a little dizzy from skipping breakfast. I paid for our drinks and left in a daze, giving her a gentle pat on the arm, telling her I hoped everything worked out. As I walked back to my car, I felt a rush of contradictory emotions: betrayal, heartbreak, anger, and an uncomfortable undercurrent of vindication. So, I'm the negative one, am I? I'm the problem, the reason everyone's life is so stressful, yet my son has time for an affair, time to get another woman pregnant and treat her like a disposable secret. The hypocrisy seared me. My mind reeled with 100 questions. Why was he doing this? Was his marriage to Sarah so miserable, or was he just a coward seduced by the thrill of something new? I drove home like a ghost, hands tight on the steering wheel, replaying every memory of my son's relationship with Sarah. Had there been signs? Maybe there were fleeting glances, moments of tension he'd brushed off as random disputes at work. I arrived home, locked myself inside, and let the swirl of emotions crash over me. For a long time, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once served Peter pancakes on Sunday mornings, and felt my eyes fill with tears. I wanted to call him, scream at him, demand answers. But a small voice told me to wait, to think this through. I remembered how Sarah had ridiculed me for being negative. Oh, if only she knew the real negativity creeping under her nose. But what would confronting Peter achieve? He would lie, or worse, he would cry and manipulate me into feeling guilty. I knew him, knew how he could charm his way out of a situation when he wanted to. He wasn't a bad man, not in the purest sense, but he was weak, desperate to be liked, desperate to avoid confrontation. A mother knows. Eventually, I went to bed, or tried to. I tossed and turned all night, my mind conjuring scenarios of how Sarah would react if she found out. Part of me felt a pang of empathy for her. She might be dismissive and selfish at times, but no woman deserves such betrayal. Yet I couldn't deny the flicker of satisfaction within me, call it pettiness, call it revenge, that whispered, "She thinks you're negative? Wait until she sees the real negativity in her marriage." The next morning, I woke with a plan forming in my head, though it made me feel both excited and appalled. I had a bizarre sense that, for once, I was no longer powerless or overshadowed. My entire life, I had been the one absorbing other people's mistakes, their judgments, their dismissals. Even when my husband was unfaithful, a secret only I had known. I swallowed the pain and carried on, never wanting to break my family apart. This time, though, I wasn't the wronged wife. I was the neglected mother, the scapegoated elder, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt a surge of twisted determination. If my daughter-in-law wanted positivity, then I had the perfect gift for her, the ultimate positive test, courtesy of the other woman. But how would I get it, and how would I orchestrate this final reveal without destroying my sanity in the process? The next week was a blur of internal debates. Part of me shrank from such a dramatic act. Another part, the part that had been injured, humiliated, and dismissed, roared for vindication. I started frequenting the farmer's market, hoping I might see her again. Luck was on my side. One bright Saturday morning, there she was, staring at tomatoes with a distant, tired look. I approached her, asked politely how she was feeling. She recognized me, offered a small, relieved smile, and admitted she felt lost. The father had gone radio silent for a few days. She didn't know what to do. I mustered my best concerned expression and coaxed her into another conversation. She opened up freely as though I were a therapist or a trusted aunt. She told me how she'd confirmed the pregnancy, how she was now about 10 weeks along, how she feared the father might ghost her entirely. Then she confided she had proof of the pregnancy that she'd tried to show him, a test, an ultrasound photo, but he'd brushed it off, telling her to keep things discreet until he sorted out his home life. My stomach churned. The condemnation for my son grew. He was living a double life, and I was about to blow it wide open. But I needed that test. I needed something Sarah couldn't deny. Gently, I suggested that if she wanted him to take responsibility, perhaps she should put the evidence right in front of him, or even his family. Her brow furrowed, but she nodded uncertainly. Would you help me? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. I don't even know who his mother is, but he always says she's difficult. I've never met her. Maybe she should know. Maybe she'd talk some sense into him. He said she's controlling, but she stopped, as though realizing she might offend me. I let the irony of that moment wash over me. Slowly, I said, I can try to help, but I need something concrete to show her, something she can't just dismiss. Her eyes lit up with the desperation of a drowning person thrown a rope. I have the test. I've kept it hidden. He wouldn't even look at it. I keep thinking if he saw it in front of his wife or mother, he might finally crack. My heart hammered in my chest as I heard myself saying, let me help you. Let me see what I can do to make him acknowledge this. And so we hatched a small plan, one that left a bitter taste in my mouth, even as it thrilled a darker part of me. She'd give me the test. I'd figure out how to confront him or someone close to him with it. Maybe it could be done in a setting where he couldn't ignore it. She seemed grateful, hugging me in the parking lot. I smelled her shampoo, a delicate jasmine scent, and felt a rush of guilt, as though I were about to exploit a clueless child. She was too trusting. But then again, my own flesh and blood had put her in this mess. We exchanged numbers so we could coordinate. I went home, pacing my living room for hours, wondering if I'd lost my mind. Was I really going to do this? Something about Sarah's accusation, too negative, rattled around in my head like a furious wasp. She wanted positivity. I would give her the most brutal positivity there was. Yet I wasn't entirely motivated by pettiness. I told myself I was also fighting for this young woman who'd been left in the lurch. She deserved better than a lying married man who wouldn't step up. Perhaps in exposing Peter, I'd force him to take responsibility. Perhaps in humiliating Sarah a bit, I'd show her that I was not the doormat she believed me to be. Over the next few days, the final touches of my plan crystallized. Sarah's birthday party was approaching, set to be a modest gathering at a restaurant. She insisted on something small, a close group of friends, Peter, and grudgingly, me. I half expected them to uninvite me, but apparently Peter convinced her that it would be rude not to include me. In the meantime, I met with the young woman again and carefully obtained the test, a small plastic stick with a bold positive line and an ultrasound photo that clearly displayed the date. She handed them to me, tears in her eyes, whispering that she just wanted him to care. My heart twisted, and I almost backed out. But then she told me how he'd blocked her calls for days, how he only texted her occasionally with vague promises that he'd make this right once some intangible stressor passed. The more she spoke, the more my bitterness toward him solidified. So I took the evidence, slipped it into my purse, and prepared myself. The day of Sarah's birthday dinner arrived. I dressed in my nicest blouse, the same one I'd worn to church on special occasions, and practiced a neutral expression in the mirror. I saw lines on my face that I hadn't noticed before, creases formed by years of silent frustration. But behind those lines, I saw a flicker of steel. I arrived at the restaurant early, anxious that I might lose my nerve. A waitress led me to a large table reserved for our party. I sat alone for a few minutes, drumming my fingers on the polished surface. Eventually, Sarah breezed in, wearing a stylish dress and a grin that didn't reach her eyes when she noticed me. She nodded politely in my direction. Peter followed behind, looking distracted. He offered me a hug that felt forced. Soon the others arrived. Her parents, a couple of her friends, a brother, and a few more acquaintances I barely knew. The conversation was light, peppered with jokes about Sarah getting older. I forced smiles, trying to blend in, yet my mind raced, recalling the feel of that plastic test in my purse. My heart thundered, adrenaline coursing through me. Should I do it now, in front of everyone? That seemed cruel, possibly too much. But then again, was it any crueler than the public rebukes I'd endured? I sipped my water, feeling my hands tremble beneath the table. Peter was across from me, fiddling with his phone, no doubt texting or checking messages. I wondered if he was communicating with her. I wondered if he felt guilty. The evening dragged on, each course served with superficial pleasantries. At one point, Sarah's friend teased her about having kids soon, and Sarah brushed it off. Casting a glance at Peter, she muttered something about maybe next year if we're financially stable. I caught a flash of pain in Peter's eyes, as though the topic of children was now a landmine. I braced myself. Finally, dessert came, some extravagant cake. The waitress placed it in front of Sarah, and everyone sang a half-hearted happy birthday. As the song ended, Sarah looked around expectantly, and the chatter continued. I felt a compulsion to do it then, to hand her my gift. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I forced a quick breath and waited for a lull in the conversation. Then, in a moment of near silence, I spoke up, voice trembling but audible. "Sarah," I said, "I'm sorry I'm not the most uplifting person. I know you believe I focus on negatives, but I wanted to bring you something that might change your perspective." My words sounded cryptic, even to me. She arched an eyebrow, confusion flickering across her face. Peter looked at me sharply, a sense of unease creeping into his eyes. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, half laughing. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing over the plastic test. Time seemed to slow down. My mind screamed at me to stop, but the lingering sting of her scorn, the knowledge of my son's betrayal, and the heartbreak of that poor pregnant woman all merged into a single irreversible act. I withdrew the positive pregnancy test and slid it across the table toward her. The entire table fell silent, confusion and shock painted on everyone's faces. Sarah stared at it, her smile wilting instantly. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered, picking up the test like it was a venomous snake. I swallowed hard. "It's very real, and it belongs to the woman Peter has been seeing. She's pregnant with his child." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Peter shot to his feet, face blanching, voice cracking as he sputtered, "Mom, what the hell are you saying?" Sarah's parents looked like they'd been slapped. Her mother started to say something, but her father pulled her back as if needing time to process. Sarah's friend covered her mouth, eyes wide. All around me, the air thickened with shock and impending fury. Sarah's hand trembled violently as she held the test. She looked at Peter, then at me, then back at Peter. "What is this?" she demanded, voice strangled. "Peter? What is she talking about?" Peter's words tangled. He tried to protest, tried to deny it. But he saw the test, saw my unwavering stare, and realized the jig was up. He reached for Sarah's arm, pleading, "It's not. I can explain. Just let's not do this here. Please." This isn't what you think." His eyes flicked to me in horror. "Why would you?" I felt oddly calm, though my heart raced beneath the surface. "I wanted you all to know. I'm tired of being blamed for negativity when the real negativity has been festering right under our noses." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, anger flushing her face. She jerked away from Peter, stood up, and nearly knocked over her chair. The entire table erupted into chaos. People stood, some tried to comfort Sarah, others stared at me like I was some unhinged saboteur. Sarah hurled the test onto the table as though it burned her. "How could you?" she hissed at Peter. "Why could you do this?" She shoved him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and he stumbled back, stammering excuses, half-formed apologies, referencing stress at work, claiming it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that he had ended it long ago. Lies dripped from his mouth, and I wanted to feel sorry for him, but all I felt was a strange release, like a dam breaking and letting all the roiling water finally flood the land. Sarah's parents grabbed her, and she started to sob into her mother's shoulder. Peter glared at me, panic and betrayal etched in his eyes, as though I were the true villain of this piece. You. You knew? He asked, voice trembling with anger. How long have you known? I squared my shoulders, refusing to let him make me cower. Long enough to see how hypocritical it was for me to be labeled negative while you carried on with your affair. You want positivity? Then let's share the positive tests too. Maybe that will spark some honesty in this family. The hush that followed was filled with tension so dense you could slice it with a knife. In the far corner, I saw the restaurant staff, wide-eyed, uncertain whether to intervene. Sarah's father stepped forward, voice low and dangerous, telling Peter he had a lot of explaining to do and that Sarah would be coming home with them for the night. Peter stuttered, tears in his eyes, and then rushed after them as they guided Sarah away from the table. Her friends followed, casting horrified glances at me. Within seconds, the entire entourage was gone, leaving only me and a bill for the birthday feast that had ended in disaster. I stood there, numb, adrenaline still coursing. The waitress approached cautiously, as though I might explode. I handed her my credit card, ignoring her pitying look. As I signed the receipt, my mind buzzed with conflicting emotions. Yes, I felt guilty, but I also felt a sense of twisted vindication. The world had always said mothers like me were powerless once their children married and moved on. But I wasn't powerless now. I had shattered the facade, forced the truth into the light. That night, I drove home under a sky that felt eerily silent. When I got inside, I shut the door and leaned against it, my breath ragged. The gravity of what I'd done sank in, and for a moment I felt the crushing weight of sorrow and regret. I might have just destroyed my son's marriage. But then he destroyed it himself, didn't he? I had only revealed the truth. Still, Sarah's tear-streaked face haunted me, and I wondered if I'd let my spite overshadow my empathy for her. I hadn't wanted to hurt her just for the sake of hurting her, but I also couldn't deny that I was fed up with being the scapegoat. In the following days, the aftermath of my revelation unfolded like a grim play. Peter showed up at my doorstep, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. He accused me of ruining his life, of blowing things out of proportion, of humiliating him in front of Sarah's entire family. You had no right, he shouted, tears of rage welling in his eyes. My own tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. I had every right after the way you two treated me, after what you did to that young woman. Does she mean nothing to you? He looked wounded, as if I'd struck him. You don't understand, he hissed. I never wanted it to go this far. I was going to end it. Sarah and I are trying to. She wants kids, and we were working on our marriage. You had to storm in with your grand reveal. You could have come to me privately. My voice rose, years of pent-up frustration lacing every word. Peter, you wouldn't have listened. You've been ignoring my calls, ignoring the situation, ignoring her. Don't you dare put this all on me. You made the mistake. I just refused to keep your secret. He looked at me like I was a stranger. You've changed, he said softly, almost fearfully. You used to be gentle. I scoffed, anger blazing inside. Gentle? I've endured more indignities in silence than you can imagine. Maybe it's time for me to stop being gentle with people who take advantage of my silence. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a photo frame fell from the wall. I sank to the floor, a choked sob escaping my lips. My heart twisted, feeling torn between the maternal instinct to protect my child and the deep betrayal I felt. I picked up the fallen frame. The glass was cracked, distorting the image of our once happy family. Fitting, I thought grimly, as I ran my fingertips over the broken glass. News of the scandal spread through family circles. Sarah moved back in with her parents. Rumors circulated about whether she'd file for divorce. Peter, in desperation, tried to set up a meeting with her and her parents, hoping for reconciliation, but they demanded proof that the affair was over, demanded contact with the pregnant woman, demanded all sorts of conditions. My involvement was rarely addressed except in hushed whispers that I was the one who delivered the bombshell. Friends and relatives started calling me, some worried, some prying for gossip. I ignored most of them, not wanting to feed the rumor mill. I didn't hear from the young pregnant woman for several days until one afternoon my phone rang with a number I recognized. She sounded shaky, said Peter had finally reached out to her wanting a meeting. She asked if I would come with her because she didn't trust him to be honest otherwise. My pulse quickened. It was strange to be asked to mediate between my son and his pregnant mistress, but here we were. I agreed, torn between dread and a twisted sense of duty. Maybe this was my chance to ensure he did right by her. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. I arrived first, wearing a plain sweater and black slacks, feeling every bit my age and then some. I ordered a tea and sat at a corner table, fiddling with the sugar pack. Eventually, I saw the two of them walk in separately. Peter looked disheveled, hair unkempt, shirt wrinkled. She looked fragile yet determined, cradling her small bump. My heart ached at the sight. She was so young, and this situation was so heavy. They approached the table, neither meeting the other's eyes. Peter cast me a look of mingled anger and desperation. We all sat down, the silence stretching taut. Finally, I cleared my throat. So, perhaps you two should talk. Peter exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He muttered a greeting to her, and she tried to keep her voice steady as she told him she wanted to know what his intentions were. He stumbled through half apologies, half justifications, claiming he'd been confused, that his marriage was already in trouble, that he hadn't meant to abandon her, that he just needed time. She finally lost her composure. Time for what? For me to go away? Tears glistened in her eyes. I'm pregnant with your child. There's no going back to before. The rawness in her voice cut through me. Peter mumbled, I know. I just didn't expect this. Sarah wants a divorce if I can't prove I'm done with this, and I don't want to lose her, but I also don't want to abandon you. This is a nightmare. My jaw tightened. A nightmare you created by lying to everyone. You need to be accountable, he glared at me. I know, Mom. God, I know. But you made it worse, throwing that test in Sarah's face at her birthday dinner. I stared him down. She deserved the truth. If you want to fix this, you need to stand up like a man, not hide behind your mother, not hide behind secrets. He said nothing for a moment, just stared into his coffee cup. Finally, he looked at her, voice trembling. I'll help you with the baby. I'll pay child support. I'll be involved in some capacity, but my marriage is on the line. Sarah's furious, and she should be, I interjected coldly. You betrayed her trust. He pressed his lips together, fighting tears. The pregnant woman scoffed softly. So you only care about your marriage? Are you telling me this child is just some collateral damage? He shook his head, tears finally spilling. No, God, I don't know. I didn't want this to happen. I was lonely, and she cut him off, voice trembling. Don't you dare reduce this to just a mistake you stumbled into. I have to carry this child for 9 months. I have to deal with everything, and you have the luxury of excuses. Her anger flared, and she reached for a napkin to dab her tears. Peter buried his face in his hands. I felt my own tears threatening, but I swallowed them. You both need to decide the next steps, I said quietly, without me meddling. But I won't stand by and let you run away from your responsibilities, Peter. The tension was suffocating. They murmured a few more strained promises, and we decided that they would meet again to talk logistics, appointments, finances, living arrangements if it came to that. As we parted ways, Peter lingered outside in the parking lot, waiting for me. When she drove off, he turned to me, raw agony in his eyes. I never wanted you to find out like this, he said. But I also never wanted this life. I feel like everything's slipping away. My heart clenched. Despite my anger, he was still my son. I reached out, touched his arm. I know, but you have to face the consequences. Sarah might leave you, or maybe she won't, but you can't manipulate both women into giving you what you want without giving them honesty. He nodded bleakly, then whispered, Mom, do you hate me? A sob wrenched in my throat, but I managed to keep it together. No, I whispered, but I hate what you've done. He looked wounded, like the little boy who once ran to me after scraping his knee seeking comfort. But we both knew this wound ran far deeper, and I wasn't going to kiss it better. We said our goodbyes quietly, and I watched him drive away, shoulders hunched in despair. Over the next few weeks, the family storm raged on. Sarah moved back with her parents indefinitely. Gossip spread among relatives. A few called to berate me for humiliating my son in such a public manner. Others quietly expressed admiration that I'd had the guts to reveal the truth. I ignored them all, focusing on my own mental well-being. And I found, strangely, that I felt more at peace than I had in years. Not because I enjoyed the chaos, but because I had finally reclaimed a piece of myself that had been buried under decades of compliance. I had spoken my truth, let the chips fall where they may, and discovered that I could survive the fallout. About a month later, Peter invited me to a small family meeting at Sarah's parents' house. We gathered around their living room, tense and formal. Sarah sat on the couch, arms crossed, eyes puffy from crying. Her parents looked furious, but they kept their composure. Peter stood awkwardly while I sat in a chair off to the side, bracing myself for whatever would come. Sarah finally broke the silence, telling Peter that she would consider reconciliation if he cut all ties with that woman. Aside from necessary legal responsibilities, if he agreed to counseling, and if he could prove his mother would not meddle further. She glared at me then as though I were some malevolent puppet master. I returned her gaze without blinking. Peter began to stammer that he'd do anything. He loved Sarah, he wanted their marriage to work, he'd do counseling, he'd sign whatever. I felt a pang of sadness for the pregnant woman, who was being relegated to an afterthought, a side piece, a problem to be managed. My stomach churned, but I held my tongue. This was between them. Sarah's father then turned to me, his voice carefully measured. "We appreciate the information you brought to light," he said, bitterness tinging his tone. "But I hope you understand that from now on, in order for this family to heal, we need minimal drama, minimal negativity." The old familiar sting returned. I realized they were still blaming me, in part, for the spectacle. I wanted to defend myself, argue that if Peter hadn't cheated, none of this would have happened, but I saw the futility. They needed a scapegoat, and the pregnant woman wasn't here. So I nodded tersely, keeping my composure. If this was the price for them to pick up the pieces of their broken marriage, so be it. But as I left that meeting, I could see in Sarah's eyes that she would never trust me, never forgive me. She might accept me as Peter's mother, but our relationship was irreparably scarred. And maybe that was inevitable. The next few months brought a tense calm. Peter and Sarah went to counseling, tried to salvage their relationship. He told me over the phone that he was paying child support, though he avoided details about how often he saw the pregnant woman or what they discussed. I sensed that Sarah demanded strict boundaries, leaving that poor girl alone in a frightening situation. Every once in a while, I'd get a text from her, updating me on the pregnancy, though she never asked for more help. I suspect she felt embarrassed or perhaps worried that I would use more secrets against my own son. The baby was due in late spring. My own life returned to its small routines, tending my yard, reading library books, occasionally meeting a neighbor for tea. The days passed, each overshadowed by an unspoken tension in my chest. I wondered how my grandchild, my actual grandchild, would grow up if I'd ever meet him or her. As for Peter and Sarah, their marriage survived on the surface, but I suspected the cracks ran deep. Occasionally, we'd meet for a strained dinner, during which Sarah would force a polite smile. Peter seemed exhausted, always on edge. I'd make small talk, careful not to say anything that might be construed as negative. Inside, I felt like screaming at the charade. Then, one morning, my phone rang at dawn. It was Peter, voice trembling. The baby had come early, 2 weeks early. The mother was alone at the hospital, and Peter found out after she texted him, panicked. He was on his way there. I asked if he wanted me to come, and for a second, he hesitated. Then he exhaled and said, "Yes, please." Maybe he just needed emotional support, or maybe he felt guilty. I threw on some clothes, rushed to my car, and drove to the hospital. The maternity ward's fluorescent lights hummed, and the air was thick with antiseptic and anxious families. I found Peter pacing in the hallway, looking pale as a sheet. "She's in there," he said, pointing to a room down the corridor. "They said she's in labor, but the baby's heart rate is dropping. They might need to do an emergency C-section." His eyes were wide with terror. Sarah forbade me to come, but how could I not? It's my child, too. My anger toward him softened in that moment. He looked like a scared boy, terrified of losing something he barely understood. I placed a hand on his arm. "Go in there," I said firmly. "Be with her. She needs someone." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "What about Sarah?" he whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know, but right now you have a more immediate responsibility." He swallowed hard, then slipped into the room. I stayed in the hallway, my heart pounding with worry. Minutes turned into an hour, then two. Nurses rushed in and out. At some point, I sank onto a bench, my thoughts whirling. Finally, Peter emerged, eyes red from crying, but with a small, tremulous smile. "It's a boy," he choked out. "He's in the NICU, but the doctors say he'll be okay. She's resting." Relief washed over me and tears sprang to my eyes. My grandson was alive. The circumstances were grim, but a new life had come into the world. Peter sat next to me, burying his face in his hands. "Mom, what do I do now?" he asked in a broken voice. I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, tears slipping down my cheeks. "You be there for your son. You step up. You do better." For a moment, mother and son found unity in their shared fear and relief. A few hours later, I was allowed to see the baby through the glass of the NICU. He was so tiny, swaddled in tubes and monitors, but alive, each breath a testament to fragile hope. My heart ached with love for this innocent child. The mother was asleep, recovering from surgery, so I couldn't see her. I stood there for a long time, absorbing the gravity of it all. Eventually, I drove home, numb and emotional. Days passed, the baby stabilized, the mother recovered, and Peter tried to juggle hospital visits with Sarah's mounting rage. She threatened divorce again, accusing him of caring more about that baby than saving their marriage. He was caught in a cruel tug of war, and it seemed no outcome would be without heartbreak. One afternoon, he called me, voice trembling with resignation. "Sarah's leaving me," he said flatly. "She says she can't do this, can't share me with someone else's baby." A pang of sorrow twisted in my chest, but I bit my tongue, unwilling to say "I told you so." Instead, I asked how he was handling it. He gave a humorous laugh. I'm a wreck, but there's this little boy who needs me, and I'm going to try to be a real father to him. His name is Daniel." My heart squeezed at the name I might never hear from Sarah's lips or from a baby in her arms. But I breathed deeply. "You do that, Peter," I said quietly. "You be there for him." Over the next couple of weeks, Peter and Sarah began formal divorce proceedings. Her family blamed me in part, though nobody said it to my face. Word reached me through the grapevine that they thought I'd meddled out of some twisted vendetta. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong, but I found it painful how easily they glossed over Peter's role in all of this. Meanwhile, the other young woman was discharged with the baby, and Peter moved into a small rental apartment, uncertain whether he wanted to cohabit with her or just share custody. The story was messy, and there was no neat resolution in sight. And me? I carried on with my quiet life, but something inside me had transformed. I no longer felt like the powerless, overshadowed matriarch. I had unleashed something that forced everyone to confront the lies and illusions. Perhaps I was negative, but I was also real, and I refused to apologize for that anymore. Late one evening, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find Sarah, disheveled and puffy-eyed. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed her way inside. I closed the door, heart pounding. She stood in my living room, eyes swimming with tears, shaking with rage or sorrow or both. "Why?" she asked in a tremulous voice. "Why did you have to do it that way? You could have told me privately. Why humiliate me like that?" Her words hit me like a blow. I shut my eyes, feeling guilt swirl in my chest. I'm sorry, I whispered. I was hurt, and I let that fuel my actions. I believed you needed to see it for yourself in a way you couldn't ignore. She let out a shaky breath. Well, congratulations, she spat bitterly. I couldn't ignore it, and now I'm divorcing your son. Are you happy? Tears rolled down her cheeks. Is that what you wanted? The sight of her in pain rattled me. I shook my head. No, I never wanted this. I wanted the lies to stop. I wanted the disrespect to end. But I didn't want to break you. A sob tore from her throat, and she sank onto my couch. I hesitated, then sat beside her. For a moment, we were just two women caught in the web of a man's betrayal. I never wanted to see you as a villain, I said softly. But when you told me I was negative, I felt so hurt, so dismissed. She exhaled, eyes closing. I guess I've always seen you as a threat to my relationship with Peter. He respects you. Or at least he used to. But you'd always point out problems, and I thought you were trying to sabotage us. Now I see. Maybe you were just trying to warn us about our own blind spots. I couldn't muster words. The moment felt fragile, and I was terrified of saying the wrong thing. She sniffed and stood up. My lawyers want me to push for everything I can get. Peter can't afford spousal support if he's also paying child support for that baby. So I'm going to press him hard because I feel like I'm the only one who didn't do anything wrong. But she paused, her voice choking. I just can't believe this is my life now. I used to envision a happy family, kids in the backyard, you and I maybe bickering about little things, but still family. I felt tears gather in my eyes. I know, I whispered. I'm sorry. Her face twisted, half in anger, half in heartbreak. She turned and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I slumped back on the couch, hugging a throw pillow, letting a few tears fall. It was all so irreparably broken. In the following months, the divorce moved forward. Sarah moved to another city, near her new job. She cut off most contact with me, ignoring my calls. Peter tried to salvage a friendship with her, but she was in no place to forgive. The pregnant woman, now a new mother, cautiously let Peter into her life. He stepped up financially, though he was awkward and uncertain about forming a family bond. Occasionally, I got updates or visited him in his cramped apartment. He was trying to adapt to fatherhood, fumbling with diapers and formula, looking more exhausted than ever, and I would hold that little boy, Daniel, feeling a rush of love I hadn't expected, a second chance at family, albeit in the strangest of ways. The mother, her name was Lydia, I learned, was wary of me at first, but eventually she thawed, realizing I wasn't there to judge her. We rarely spoke of that day at the restaurant, though I sensed a lingering guilt in her for how everything had come to light. Despite the tension, there were small moments of grace, like when she let me rock Daniel to sleep, or when I brought over groceries to help out. Over time, the heaviness in my chest eased. I could look at myself in the mirror and see not just an older woman with wrinkles of worry, but a survivor who took a stand. Yes, I'd acted out of anger. Yes, I'd caused a scene, but the deeper sin belonged to the secrets and betrayals. If anything, I felt I'd lit a fuse that needed to be lit. The illusions had burned away. One afternoon, as I sipped tea by my window, watching birds flit through my yard, I reflected on everything that had happened. My daughter-in-law, soon-to-be ex, had called me negative, in truths. I had always felt overshadowed, forced to speak warnings and truths nobody wanted to hear. But ironically, it was that so-called negativity that exposed the hidden rot. It was that negativity that forced everyone to confront reality and hopefully grow from it. I still had regrets about the pain I caused Sarah in that public spectacle, but I couldn't regret shining light on the truth. Months turned into a full year since the day of that fateful birthday dinner. Sarah and Peter's divorce was finalized. She moved on, or so I heard, finding a new place and a new job, maybe even a new relationship. Peter continued to co parent with Lydia, forging a delicate balancing act. He was still ashamed when he looked at me, but we were slowly building a fragile bridge. He knew I loved him, even if I couldn't condone what he'd done. The label of negative mother wasn't so quick to fade, but I found I no longer cared. I had my quiet house, my small yard, and occasionally I had Daniel in my arms. That was enough. Sometimes life is messy, layered with sins and secrets, heartbreak and betrayal. But from the wreckage, we salvage truth. And maybe in that truth, we find the beginnings of something real, something unashamed, something positive.